This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Hi there, welcome to episode 276 of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast. And today I'm really excited to be presenting this in a different format. It's going to be myself alongside my colleague, Gerard Fitzgerald. And to start with, Gerard's going to just explain a little bit about himself and share some background there. And then we'll crack on and I'll explain a little bit more about the episode and how this is all going to pan out.
Thanks, David. So my name is Gerard Fitzgerald. Don't try say it often because it's a hard name to say. But I'm a sports psychologist in training with David as my supervisor. I'm coming towards the end of my pathway now, finally. I've been involved with 2 football academies throughout my last 3 or 4 years working as a sports psych in training, as well as 2 rugby academies, and I would say maybe 70 to 80 clients now on a one-to-one basis over the last 3 or 4 years. So a lot of experience, a lot of issues dealt through both in a team environment and an individual environment, and looking forward to discussing what we're about to discuss today.
Yeah, and to be fair, you probably don't do yourself justice there because you've also got plenty of experience from a mental health background as well. Is that fair to say?
I always cut myself short when it comes to things like this. I separate the sports side to my work side sometimes. Yes, so I've worked a lot with mental health, especially with young adolescents, and in the school environment, in the justice system, and with making better decisions and social empathy, etc., etc. So a lot of work in the mental health side of psychology as well that I always seem to leave out when I'm talking about the sports side.
Good stuff. And also, yeah, you've got a lot of expertise there. And today we're going to talk about a case study. Essentially, we're going to look at a 11-year-old footballer. We're going to give her a name, Carly. And so Carly is a sensitive soul who plays football to a high level, who essentially worries an awful lot about her teammates. So that's the case study we're going to discuss. And we'll go on to discuss another 3 case studies in the next 4 episodes of this podcast. So that's the scene set there. So I'm gonna pass it over to Gerard now to talk a little bit about Carly and the types of problems that being sensitive brings and worrying an awful lot about teammates, and then we'll talk about the implications, and then we'll go on to share 3 tips collectively that might help you as a parent if you're listening, or as a football coach. So yeah, go for it. Over to you.
Look, I think one of the main things when we do things like this and when we have parents and is to normalize these kind of situations with young people. Yes, this is a case study, but these things that we see are quite normal for young people, especially the age bracket, especially in a high academy. It's quite normal. So if we can normalize these things, it kind of opens the conversation for the young person and the parents. We have a lot of parents coming to us and thinking, how could this be with my child? How can this be? But it is quite normal to have these kind of things. So being a sensitive player with a lot of emotional energy can be quite draining when you're playing football, both in training and in match situations. Being caring can be seen typically as a strength. Not we don't talk about that enough. It can actually be a strength for a young person to have if we can deal with the mental draining side of it all. There's hidden pressures there. A child who's overly sensitive can put a lot of pressures on themselves, especially when they're thinking what their teammates are thinking. If we make a mistake, if we perceive ourselves to letting down a teammate, are they thinking I'm not good enough? Are they thinking I'm useless? What are they thinking? That's where the mental energy can be drained, especially being on the pitch, something we don't account for as players and as parents sometimes, and practitioners. When that mental energy is tasked and taken from us, can we perform to our best when we're engaging with that mental energy? Because we have a bar And when it gets shorter and shorter, we have less tolerance for things. We start believing these things like our players might be thinking that, or our teammates, or our coaches, or parents, embarrassment. So normalizing these situations can be mind-blowing to young people sometimes. When you have someone across from you that says this is normal, you're not responsible for these thoughts, but you are responsible for how we act and how we react to these thoughts. Can go a long way with a young person, I think.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. There's a couple of things that you've come up with where you say about normalizing. I think a lot of parents would agree that sometimes, I suppose, the parent to child conversation can be very, very difficult. And I suppose if where the child might get defensive and then the parent might get defensive and then they butt heads essentially. Um, so yeah, that and for some strange reason, they will listen to a stranger essentially who can then normalize it, and sometimes that is just part of I suppose, part of our role in that respect, isn't it? Given a fresh perspective, and then yeah, all of a sudden the parent might have told the kid 10 times exactly the same thing, but something changes.
There's a great story that I share with a lot of the parents I work with because it's a lot of the frustration a parent has with these kind of things, how I'm telling them to do X, but they're doing Y, or especially with you find at grassroots levels, a lot of the coaches are actually parents of the young people. But so my story, there's a great story about David Beckham. He's dropping his daughter Harper to high school, maybe a few years ago. I don't know what age Harper is now, and she makes him drop her 5 blocks away from the school. And he's like, why am I dropping? And he's like, because you're such an embarrassment, Dad. So if that is happening, David Beckham, what hope do we have as parents to be a positive influence about change, about decisions on a pitch? It doesn't matter whether you are, Cristiano Ronaldo, you're just dad or you're just mom. So sometimes having someone from the outside in that's not a parent can be very beneficial for the young person, and then for the parent to understand, well, David Beckham can't even drop his bloody child to school. What hope do I have an influence in the football pitch because I'm just mum or dad? So it's a good kind of understanding for a parent sometimes.
Yeah, and I suppose the interesting bit there is like we've all got a negative bias upstairs, whether it's the child, the parent, you, me, that is just the way it is. And you mentioned there about the I suppose the sensitive kid potentially is caring. So that in my eyes means she's probably going to be quite a good teammate. Um, but the negative bias from the parent probably points out all of the negatives around the sensitivity aspect. Why can't you just be like this? Or they end up, I suppose, picking up on as I say, the negative points and things that you could maybe improve on, and then she finds it like more and more critical, and so on and so forth. And yeah, parents trying to be meaning, but it just it comes across the wrong way to them, unfortunately.
And when you mentioned about the comparison, if you're constantly comparing yourself to other teammates, what they're thinking or how they're doing, you're always at a deficit. You know, that leads to the self-doubt and the criticism, how we're talking. If I'm worried about my misplaced pass, or I'm worried about my performance and what my teammates think of it, well, what else am I missing in the game? If I'm so focused on a mistake, then there's so much around the game that we're missing. A really good thing I like to do with a young person is if we're focused on a pass that has gone wrong, well, how long did it take you to make that pass? It's usually like 3 seconds, 4 seconds. How many passes do you do a game? I do 60. Okay, 3 by 60. That's 180. That's 3 minutes. How long do you play football for? 60 minutes. So over something that has taken 3 minutes maximum, or you can be really generous and say 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 minutes. What of the game are you missing? You're missing another 55 minutes of the game because you're focused on something that just took five. And given that accountability and responsibility to beat the self-doubt and beat the criticism and beat the what others are thinking all the time, and taking responsibility yourselves to go, I'm wasting 55 minutes of a game worrying about the 5 minutes passing that I might have potentially only got one wrong in, not all wrong. So putting that responsibility back on the young person, because they can take it. A lot of parents don't think the young person can take the they can take the responsibility.
Yeah, again, when there's not really emotion involved, essentially when you're, I suppose a big part of our role is to question, isn't it? And to ask open questions and to probe and to come from a variety of angles, whether it's citing their heroes or citing other people, to then just for the cogs to turn. I suppose in terms of the mental energy side, which you've touched on as well, do you want to just talk a little bit more about mental energy and then how that goes on to influence a young footballer on the pitch?
We'd say with the mental energy stuff and with the constant setbacks and mistakes, the impact from mentally dealing with these things is like one example. Carly might start dreading going to practice, going to training sessions. She might not want to go play. She might not want to be with her teammates because she feels like she's constantly letting them down. And how that looks then and like for an impact with how that in a broader setting, like if that keeps building and building and building, I don't want to catastrophize here, but the young person is already catastrophizing. Like you might not want to go to training anymore. You might not want to go to matches anymore. It just the whole aspect of football might not just become fun anymore. If you're not talking about it, if you're not sharing your experiences, you know, this is why a lot of young people end up actually just dropping out of football at any level. The main reasoning is it's just not fun anymore. And it might just come from simple things like comparing to others, the mental energy of what others are thinking, and it is all like when we think of performance isn't an 8 out of 10. You know, Performance is attitude, commitment, focus, work rate, communication, because they're the only bloody things we can control on the pitch. The other aspects of performance we can control, but they're the ones we're worried about: comparison, self-criticism, what others are thinking. So if we can shift that process and gain back our mental energy, it's fantastic. A great thing you can do with a young person is tell me how much of being a good footballer is physical and how much of a good footballer is mental as a percentage. And you get the usual, 70-30, 60-80, or 60-80, 60-40. And okay, well, your 60% or your 70% physical is your 3 training sessions, your 2 games at grassroots, training with the school, whatever it might be. What's the 30%? What's the 30% mental? What are you doing for the 30% mental? And you usually get the young person like, nothing. So is it fair to say when you go play football, are you only doing 70% of yourself? And that kind of feeds into the responsibility part of, oh, actually, if I'm just engaging in this mental side all the time negatively, then I'm only 70% of a footballer when I even train. So again, that responsibility piece, making football fun, being aware of what the mental side actually is and how that can possibly be draining sometimes can be a good insight into the young person.
Okay, so I've got to try and summarize this in about one sentence in 10 seconds. Um, what I'm hearing is whether you're a coach or a parent, certainly be thinking about the fun side. Football can get very serious, and essentially, if you're a sensitive kid like Carly, then that can bring about an emotional roller coaster where they're catastrophizing, very, very negative. So yeah, we've got that to factor in. I would say the other thing would be the strengths based approach would be very, very helpful there. Remind them an awful lot about the positive things that they do and the good parts of their personality would be a big one. And then maybe last point in all this is, yeah, when people do talk to outside people, randomers like ourselves, randomers who are qualified, by the way, um, it can help normalize situations. We can help shift people's perspectives, and then, as you say, that 30% can then have a big impact on the fun factor, their well-being, their performance levels, and so on. Is that a fair summary?
I couldn't have said it better myself if I tried, but what I would add is like just one caveat there is like sensitivity is not inherently negative. In this dog eat dog world of sport, People put so much emphasis on win at all costs, always strive to be your best, don't show emotion, especially sensitive emotion like crying after it, It's like it's not a negative. It's how we can manage it and how we can understand it to turn it into being a very empathetic performer. That doesn't make you any less of the win at all costs attitude that can be portrayed sometimes. And that is the attitude that we see on the sidelines from parents, unfortunately, that sometimes turns the kids away from football or away from any sport.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And I suppose from a coaching point, there is the sensitive kid probably will need a little bit more time and more patience and support. And yeah, that's fine. It can obviously it can be difficult because a lot of people are volunteers in a youth sport setting, so it's a challenge. But yeah, certainly something to factor in is how much you're going to challenge them, and yeah, the support element. So look, we'll leave it at that for today. Yeah, big thank you, Gerard, for your first performance there. And yeah, really looking forward to next week's episode too. If anybody wants to reach out and have a conversation with us, please do get in touch. The email address is info@sport-excellence.co.uk. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Take care. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sports psychology resources. The Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.